The crystal chandeliers of the Harrison estate cast golden light across the marble floors as Elena adjusted her emerald green gown nervously. At 28, she had worked as a housekeeper for many wealthy families, but she had never been asked to play the role of companion at a high society event. Tonight, she was supposed to be the girlfriend of her employer, Alexander Harrison, CEO of Harrison Industries and one of the city's most eligible bachelors. 3 days earlier, Alexander had approached her with an unusual request. His business partners were pressuring him to settle down, suggesting that his single status made him appear unreliable for their upcoming international merger. His ex-fiancée, Victoria, who had broken their engagement 2 years ago when she decided his 7-year-old daughter Sophie was too much responsibility, would be attending tonight's gala with her new wealthy husband. Alexander needed someone trustworthy to play the part of his devoted girlfriend for one evening. "Elena," Alexander had said in his study, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had learned to be cautious about trust. "I know this is an unusual request, but you're the only person I can count on to handle this with discretion and grace." Elena had agreed, partly because she needed the generous bonus he offered, but mostly because she had seen how the constant questions about his personal life affected both Alexander and Sophie. The little girl often asked why her daddy looked sad when people mentioned marriage and family. Now, as Elena stood in the grand ballroom, she felt the weight of curious stares from the city's elite. Alexander appeared at her side, looking handsome in his navy blue tuxedo, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "You look beautiful," he murmured, offering her his arm. "Are you ready for this performance?" Elena nodded, though her heart was racing. She had studied etiquette books and practiced conversations, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of pretending to be in love with a man she deeply respected but barely knew beyond their professional relationship. As they moved through the crowd, Alexander introduced her as "my Elena" to business associates and social acquaintances. Each introduction felt more natural than the last, and Elena found herself genuinely enjoying the conversations about art, travel, and social causes that these events typically featured. "Alexander?" called a smooth voice from behind them. They turned to see Victoria Ashworth approaching, resplendent in white silk and carrying herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in high society. "How wonderful to see you again." Victoria's eyes assessed Elena with the calculating gaze of someone who knew exactly how to spot an imposter. "And you must be the mysterious girlfriend I've been hearing about." "I'm Victoria, Alexander's former fiancée." Elena felt Alexander's arm tense under her hand, but she smiled warmly. "It's lovely to meet you, Victoria. Alexander has told me so much about his past." "Has he?" Victoria's smile was sharp. "How refreshing. Alexander was always so secretive when we were together. Tell me, what do you do for work?" Elena felt the weight of the question, knowing that Victoria was probing for ammunition. But before she could answer, Alexander stepped closer to her side. "Elena is an interior design consultant," he said smoothly. "She's been helping me redecorate the house to make it more welcoming for Sophie." It wasn't entirely untrue. Elena had suggested several changes to make the mansion feel more like a home, and Alexander had implemented every one of her recommendations. "How domestic," Victoria said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "I remember trying to convince you to hire professionals for that sort of thing." "I prefer Elena's personal touch," Alexander replied, his voice carrying a warmth that made Elena's heart skip unexpectedly. "She understands what makes a house feel like a home." As Victoria moved on to other conversations, Elena realized that Alexander's defense of her had felt genuine rather than performative. When she looked up at him, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not letting her make me feel small." Alexander's expression softened. Elena, you could never be small. You have more grace and intelligence than half the people in this room. The evening continued with dinner and dancing. As Alexander led Elena onto the dance floor for a waltz, she found herself caught up in the fantasy they were creating. His hand was warm on her back, and when he looked down at her, the careful distance he usually maintained seemed to have disappeared. "You're a natural at this," Alexander said as they moved together to the music. "I'm beginning to think I should have asked you to attend these events with me years ago." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "It's just pretend, Alexander. Don't let the setting fool you." But even as she said it, Elena realized that her own feelings were becoming more complicated. Working in Alexander's house for the past 2 years, she had seen him not as the intimidating CEO the business world knew, but as a devoted father who read bedtime stories with different voices for each character and who worried about Sophie's happiness more than his own success. "Is it?" Alexander asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the music. "Just pretend?" Before Elena could answer, the music ended, and they were interrupted by business associates who wanted to discuss the merger. As Alexander was drawn into conversations about international markets and corporate strategies, Elena stepped back, observing him in his element. She noticed Victoria watching from across the room, and when their eyes met, the other woman approached with determined elegance. "I hope you won't take this the wrong way," Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet with underlying steel. "But I feel I should warn you about what you're getting into." Elena kept her expression neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean. Alexander is married to his work, dear, and that little girl of his will always come first. I learned that the hard way. He's not capable of putting a woman's needs before his responsibilities." Elena studied Victoria's face, seeing not malice, but a kind of wounded pride. "That sounds like he's a man who honors his commitments." Victoria's carefully composed expression faltered slightly. "You don't understand. There's no room in his life for romance, for spontaneity, for putting your relationship first. Everything revolves around schedules and responsibilities." "Victoria," Elena said gently, "I think maybe you and Alexander wanted different things. That doesn't make either of you wrong." For a moment, Victoria's mask slipped completely, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "Do you love him?" The question caught Elena off guard. As she searched for an answer, she realized that somewhere between the careful planning for tonight and the gentle way Alexander had defended her, her feelings had shifted from professional respect to something much deeper. "Yes," Elena said simply, surprising herself with the honesty. Victoria nodded slowly. "Then I hope you understand him better than I did." Later that evening, as the gala wound down and they prepared to leave, Alexander and Elena found themselves alone on the mansion's terrace, looking out over the city lights. "I owe you more than money for tonight," Alexander said, loosening his bow tie. "You handled everything beautifully, especially Victoria." Elena turned to face him, her emerald dress rustling in the evening breeze. "Alexander, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When we were dancing, when you defended me to Victoria, was that part of the performance?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his hands resting on the stone balustrade. "I thought it was. But somewhere during the evening, I realized I wasn't pretending anymore." Elena felt her breath catch. "What does that mean?" Alexander turned to face her fully, his expression serious but tender. "It means that for 2 years I've watched you care for my daughter and my home with a kindness and dedication that amazes me. It means that tonight when I introduced you as mine, it felt more right than anything has in years." "Alexander, I know this complicates things. I know I'm your employer and that there are a dozen reasons why this could be a mistake. But Elena, somewhere between asking you to pretend to care about me and watching you actually do it with such grace, I realized that I don't want this to be pretend anymore. Elena stepped closer, her heart racing. What about what Victoria said? About your priorities? About Sophie always coming first? She was right about my priorities, Alexander said honestly. Sophie will always be my first responsibility, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for love in our lives. In fact, watching you with Sophie has shown me that the right person doesn't compete with my daughter for attention. She enhances our family. Elena reached up to touch his face gently. I fell in love with both of you, Alexander. Sophie isn't an obstacle to overcome. She's part of what makes you the man I care about. As Alexander leaned down to kiss her, Elena realized that the best performances are the ones that help us discover truths we were afraid to acknowledge. They had started the evening pretending to be in love, but somewhere between the dancing and the defending and the quiet moments of honesty, the pretense had become real. 6 months later, Elena stood in the same ballroom, but this time she wore a simple white dress and Alexander's grandmother's ring. Sophie stood beside them as the flower girl, beaming with the joy of a little girl who had watched her two favorite people fall in love. As they exchanged vows, Elena thought about how the most unexpected requests can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. She had agreed to pretend to be Alexander's girlfriend for one evening, but she had ended up becoming his wife and Sophie's stepmother for a lifetime. Love, she had learned, doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures and obvious signs. Sometimes it grows quietly in the space between what we think we want and what we actually need, revealing itself only when we're brave enough to stop performing and start being genuine.